Ah, Christmas. It's that special time of year that we all know and love so very much. Who can forget those special moments of Christmases gone by? Decorating your tree whilst listening to Michael Bublé's 50th Christmas album, wrapping those presents with enough sellotape to make it a mini Fort Knox. And lastly, who can forget that time the space Titanic almost crashed into Buckingham Palace? Wait, what? Yes, back on Christmas Day 2007, Doctor Who had its third annual Christmas special, after previously airing The Christmas Invasion and The Runaway Bride. Much like those previous two, Voyage of the Damned was written by showrunner Russell T Davies, who decided to make the episode an homage to disaster films like The Poseidon Adventure, but this time set in the one place Christmas can't get to:
space!
Voyage of the Damned also saw the casting of Australian singer Kylie Minogue as the main supporting character Astrid Peth. You may know Kylie as the one that sings that song that goes la la la. Yeah, that one. She'd also acted in such classic films as 1994's Street Fighter. Oh no. So coming off the back of the hugely successful Series 3, could Voyage of the Damned make 2007 a Christmas to remember? Or was it a Christmas you'd rather forget? Grab your replica space Titanic and let's find out.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Christmas.
To begin with, I think the aesthetics of the episode are on point throughout. The party scenes are very classy and Christmassy, creating a homely and warm feeling, aided by the orchestral and lounge versions of Christmas songs like Jingle Bells and Walking in a Winter Wonderland. I think it adds a lot to this glamorous atmosphere, selling you on the high class, fancy nature of the cruise. I also like the reveal that it's a spaceship, since the Doctor walks through and starts noticing robotic angels and a small spiky red boy. Your mind kind of goes, hang on a minute, since you initially expect it to have been the actual Titanic. But then we get that shot out the window revealing that the ship is orbiting Earth, making everything click into place, those oddities suddenly making sense. There's a certain vibe a lot of Doctor Who stories have, almost making them like Mad Libs, but not in a bad way. You get stories like, what if the Doctor gets a toothache and meets Doc Holliday in Tombstone the day of the gunfight at the OK Corral? Or what if the Doctor fights a werewolf with Queen Victoria? The whole concept of Voyage of the Damned is, what if the Titanic, but in space? That's all the cold open needs to establish, so I think it does it very well, setting up that distinctly Doctor Who atmosphere. Similarly, once the Doctor busts out the tuxedo, we know something bad is going to happen. We know this incarnation likes to wear the tux for events, having worn it in Rise of the Cybermen and the Lazarus Experiment, but like he says in that episode,
black tie. And then whenever I wear this, something bad always happens.
It plays off audience expectations, since we've been shown that the tux is a common outfit for this Doctor, and we know it means danger. Even though it's Doctor Who, there's danger in every episode. Much like the electricity Martha encounters in Smith and Jones, it's a way of nudging the audience and saying, yeah, you know what that means. We then get a glimpse of this danger as a so-called heavenly host starts to malfunction, and gets taken down to the robotics department. This room is a stark contrast from the warm and welcoming party above. Everything looks so much colder since there's no reason to make it look nice like the party. It's not for show. I think it's a good way of showing this colder, less friendly side of the setting, along with showing how behind every event there are ordinary people just doing their jobs, without the riches and class of the people they're serving. One of the people just doing their job is Midshipman Frame, who is, well, a midshipman, the lowest rank for an officer. I like this character a lot. He's the youngest on the bridge since he only just qualified, and as with anyone who has just qualified for a job like this, he knows the rulebook like the back of his hand, insisting on sticking by the rule of at least 2 people being on the bridge at any given time. I think it's a good way to establish the character as an optimist with his own values and moral code, believing in what's right and doing his job. Like the book Save the Cat says, you should introduce a protagonist by showing them doing a good thing. This is used here to show that Frame is a good lad, which is an establishment you need since he later doubles down on being a protagonist, agreeing with the Doctor that the shields need to be put up to survive the meteors, even if his superior demands otherwise. It's his job to keep the passengers safe, so much like him staying on the bridge, he's determined to do his job the way he's supposed to. It makes him a very honourable character, so you respect and warm to him. I also like that the motivations of the captain aren't flat out evil, there are layers to it. He's crashing the ship to set his family up for life with the money he was offered, as he was going to die in 6 months anyway. It doesn't make him a moustache twirling villain like Max Capricorn. Instead, you can understand why he's doing it, even if it is still very much morally wrong to kill that many people. I just think that there is some good character work established at numerous points throughout the episode, with most of the characters introduced and set up well. For example, the egotistical Rixton Slade is established using an altered save the cat technique, showing him as a hateable character rather than a good one. The first we see of him, he's boasting on the phone about money, and then shortly after that Astrid accidentally bumps into him and drops a tray of glasses, prompting him to snap at her and threaten to get the cost of his suit taken out of her wages. It tells you everything you need to know about Slade, that he's this selfish and egotistical person, a stereotypical money tycoon character with no care for others. I think it's smart to make you hate him from the very beginning, since the whole point of him is being irredeemable. Right at the end of the story, Slade thanks the Doctor for making him rich, not showing any care for the people who died. Mr. Copper makes the observation that the Doctor wouldn't have chosen Slade to survive if he could. I like this acknowledgement, since sometimes the people who don't deserve to live end up being the ones surviving. I also love that Copper adds that the choice of who lives and who dies would make the Doctor a monster. It's such a good touch, such a good way to show the underlying darkness that would bubble up in the waters of Mars, since Series 4 sees the Doctor making that choice a couple of times, ultimately going overboard with that power in the waters of Mars. The Doctor has always and will always struggle to deal with this great power, being able to decide who lives and who dies, so I think this ending and Slade as a character is good for not only showing that, but also setting up that aspect of his late story arc. Next up in the supporting cast introduction tour are the Van Offs, who are being mocked by the table next to them since they're in fancy dress and look out of place. I think these two characters are a good fit for the Doctor because they're outcasts, just like the Doctor has always been. It makes sense for them to gravitate together, especially because the Doctor always sticks up for these kinds of people, who are just there enjoying themselves but being judged for not fitting in. The Van Offs are a bit of an interesting anomaly in this episode because they don't really fit the tone. They're not really there for comic relief, nor are they an important part of the story, so it kinda makes you wonder what purpose they serve, apart from being easy targets for Slade to constantly mock. However, they have a good character moment whilst fixing a heavenly host, where Foon reveals that she didn't organically win the tickets like she claimed. She instead spent 5,000 credits calling the line to guarantee the win, which is money they'll never be able to afford to pay back. I like that Morvin doesn't make it a dramatic, relationship-shattering moment, instead forgiving her because he loves her and can overlook it. I think we can all relate to this on some level, having someone who drives you mad sometimes, but you just love them so much that it doesn't even matter. It feels like a very realistic character interaction because of this, Morvin just laughing at the absurdity of it rather than wasting time getting angry at Foon. I think it's a nice moment for the pair, building a sense of sympathy for them both when they get killed later. I actually kind of like how sudden and blunt Morvin's death is. He simply steps on a weakened bit of metal and falls off into the engine. It's not dramatic in a traditional way, there's no real build up, it just happens out of nowhere. One of our main supporting characters dead, just like that. I think it does a lot to make the danger of the episode feel realistic, since these characters can just snuff it in the blink of an eye without warning. I also appreciate Foon's refusal to acknowledge his death, desperate to believe that he's somehow safe and still alive. Again, it feels very realistic, a character bargaining like this and becoming a complete babbling wreck. If the person you loved just died so anticlimactically like that, you wouldn't believe it. You'd convince yourself that it just didn't happen, that there's some kind of explanation. I also think it seeds part of the ending, with the Doctor reacting to Astrid's death in a similar way, but we'll get to that in a minute. Astrid Peth is an interesting character with a horrible portrayal. Despite being from the alien planet Stowe, she still sounds Australian, so clearly every planet has an Australia too, which come to think of it is probably where most Doctor Who stories take place. I think that the Doctor and Astrid have good chemistry together, with some good interactions throughout the episode. In their very first meeting, we learn that Astrid yearns to travel among the stars, seeing another world, I think it makes her very grounded and relatable, since we all wish we could see new wonders. It also sets her up in this companion-like role by giving her this traditional companion background and aspirations, since companions are typically people who have an adventurous and curious core to them. The Doctor then allows her to achieve this dream, taking her down to Earth service with other passengers on shore leave. There's something really wholesome and sweet about how happy Astrid is to be on a different planet. She appreciates the things we see as mundane, such as concrete and shops. These are just everyday things to us, we don't think twice about them, nor do we see any beauty in them. They're just there. The Doctor communicates this audience reaction well, suggesting that the pyramids and New Zealand are better, but it's this appreciation of the small things that make Astrid feel like a real person. It's just the mere being there that excites her, like the thrill of being in another country even if there seems to be no difference to where you came from, like an American coming over to Europe and being excited about roundabouts. It puts everything back into perspective for us. The Doctor always has to wow someone by taking them to another place in time or some colourful alien world, but here Astrid is overjoyed at the mundanity of our everyday life. It's a good character moment that shows her optimism and starry-eyed nature. However, there is also something deeply wrong here. It's Christmas Eve and the high street is somehow completely empty, which would never happen. A real-life alien invasion is much more likely to happen than that. We then get the greatest moment of the whole episode, as the Doctor and Astrid meet the one, the only, Wilfred Mott, who explains that everyone has deserted London because of the events of the last two Christmas specials. I've always spoken a lot about the world building of the Russell T Davies era, but it's this attention to detail that adds so much to the present day settings of that era. If there were two Christmas alien invasions of London in a row, it's absolutely to be expected that everyone would be terrified of being there for the third year, since it would probably happen again. I think it just creates a sense of connectivity, with the adventures having a real consequence to them. And to nobody's surprise, it turns out that danger is indeed on the cards, with meteors striking the Titanic because the shields are down. I like the build up to this impact, with the Doctor investigating and trying to warn the bridge. It's so in character for him to do this, since the character is used to trouble always following them around. Similarly, this curiosity gets the Doctor into danger, since trying to warn everyone results in him being dragged away by the stewards. It's a good way to smoothly bring our cast together, as each of our supporting characters end up becoming part of the group for one reason or another. With a disaster story like this, you kind of need to have everyone together at the start, so this is a good way to group them without it feeling contrived. The actual hit is a good action scene nailing this disaster movie genre, showing the utter chaos and destruction before ripping away the TARDIS, and stopping the Doctor from being able to whisk everyone away to save them. I think it's always good when a story takes the time to put this limitation on the character, forcing the Doctor to use more creative ways to save the day, whilst also upping the stakes dramatically just by stripping away this cornerstone of the show. It's done in so many episodes, like The Impossible Planet, Rise of the Cybermen, Father's Day, and the entirety of Season 12. The Doctor needs the TARDIS, so taking it away is always a good way of limiting the character to drive the action. He ends up taking charge immediately, giving that iconic speech about why they should trust him, with the Doctor forever triumphantly playing to punctuate it. The speech is a bit cheesy, and most of what he says means nothing to the characters anyway, but it's still just great. I think that the cast of characters is colourful and varied enough to give them each a distinct presence. They don't blend into one, which is nice. I also like that there's a bit of a through line of people having deep secrets. Foon had the secret of the tickets, but we also learn that Banaka Falata is secretly a cyborg, which brings him great shame since cyborgs are discriminated against on Stowe. Much like Foon and Morvin, it builds sympathy for this character we don't know yet is gonna die, even though there's this awfully delivered line by Kylie Minogue.
No, but everything's changed now. Cyborgs are getting equal rights.
Another character with a secret is Mr. Copper, the crew's tour guide. I think he's a fun character, making all of these wild and fantastical claims about what Earth is like and how humans behave.
They then eat the turkey people for Christmas dinner, like savages.
It It's some good comedic writing that pokes fun at how things can get twisted around and misinterpreted, completely changing the original context and making things sound worse than they are. It also shows how easy it is to believe someone who says they know what they're talking about. Without context, his stories are almost believable, but because we know it's not true, it's funny. It's comedic because of their ignorance, and it also shows how alien these people are despite looking human on the surface. However, much like Foon and Banakafalata, Mr. Copper also has a shameful secret, since he got a bogus degree and faked his way into being the tour guide. You feel a lot of sympathy for him because he feels like he wasted his entire life, just working a regular job and not having anything to his name by the end of it, which is why he decided to become the tour guide, just so then he could see alien worlds and have a good time. This characterization means he gets a really deservedly nice and uplifting ending at the end of the episode. He was always a supportive and good-natured character who tried his best, so I like that he gets a second chance to make something of his life, with a credit card that has £1,000,000 on it. Unlike Slade, this time the Doctor is happy about someone being rich. Copper is such a humble character that only wants somewhere to live, whereas Slade was very driven by money and always wanted more. Copper has a real human heart to him, so when he's dancing away in joy, he isn't shouting about buying flashy cars or watches. He's overjoyed about being able to have a house with a garden, a kitchen, and chairs. Much like Astrid being happy to be in a boring high street, it shows how people can enjoy the little things in life. He's just such a wholesome character, and his little celebration of having something to show for his life is very uplifting and sweet. I think this is a commentary about how most of the human race ends up spending all of their lives making ends meet, and never experiencing the joys of life or following their dreams. It's similar to Foon and Morvin. Yes, they would have never been able to repay that money, but they still got to enjoy themselves and go on this cruise, which is more fulfilling than wasting their lives working away in the robotics factory. Astrid, Foon, Banakafalata and Mr. Copper are all simply trying to enjoy life, even if they feel shame for doing so. I think it's quite a nice and understated part of the episode, saying how there's nothing wrong with just having a good time. You don't have to tie yourself down and waste your life making ends meet. Just live, because you won't be around forever. Especially if you happen to come across a creepy golden angel with a frisbee on its head. As is typical with Doctor Who, Voyage of the Damned has a monstrous villain cropping up throughout. To keep in line with the Christmas theming of the Robot Santas from 2005 and 2006, Russell T Davies decided to make the villains of the 2007 robot angels called Heavenly Hosts. I think they're suitable villains, and they're established well early on with the mystery of their malfunctioning. The hosts almost make it into a base under siege story in a way. Midshipman Frame makes contact with survivors in the kitchens, only for them and dozens more across the ship to suddenly start dying as the hosts appear and kill them. I think it's quite dark when the kitchen staff get killed. Both they and Frame are so relieved that the hosts are there, thinking that they'll be saved, but then these robots just turn against them and slaughter them right then and there. Imagine that initial relief turning into a sudden chilling panic and fear as you realise your saviours are here to murder you in cold blood. It would be such a terrifying way to die, with this sense of betrayal and hopelessness. I think the hosts are suitable monsters for their purpose in this episode. They're not there as the main threat, just there to keep our protagonists in a sense of obvious danger. Their design is creepy, and their monotonous, deadpan voices lend a sinister feeling to their threats, which is good delivery by Colin McFarlane. However, I can't help but feel like they may as well have just been the Vok robots from the Robots of Death in season 14. In that celebrated 1977 story, the robot workers on a mining sandcrawler started to murder the crew because they'd been reprogrammed by a human scientist. The heavenly hosts of Voyage of the Damned essentially serve the same purpose, and even look similar to the Vok robots, so it would have just been easier for them to be that monster. I've always hated when Doctor Who creates a brand new monster that's identical to a past one they could have easily brought back, since bringing back the Vok robots would have been a nice treat for classic fans, along with adding to that idea of Doctor Who having a shared universe, especially because Davies did that world building himself, with things like the Ood and Jadoon having defined roles. And clearly the Vok robots have some kind of storytelling potential, because Big Finish has made a 4 box set spin-off with them, but then again they've made 2 box sets of a Lady Christina spin-off, so obviously they don't know when to say no. Even though I like the industrial aesthetic of the episode, the scene on the makeshift bridge above the engine is awful. As almost all of our characters are across the bridge, the hosts descend from above and start throwing frisbees around, with our heroes hitting said frisbees away with pieces of metal, like kids in an unsupervised PE class. It just looks awful, with really dated effects and bad timing. The Doctor gets hit by a halo but then reacts way too late, making it almost comical, since it takes so much longer than it should for him to suddenly grab his arm in pain. Then Banakafalata shoots an EMP out of his chest like some kind of anime character and disables the hosts, dying in the process. I will admit it's a little bit emotional when he dies, since he'd only just come to accept his nature as a cyborg and be proud of it, but this is a scene that wipes out 3 of the supporting cast within 5 minutes, so it just kind of feels shoved in to slim the cast down and make the writing easier, since Foon then kills herself to take out the surviving host for basically no reason. There's a good scene that follows this bridge sequence though, as the Doctor offers to take Astrid on board the TARDIS, admitting that this is basically his lifestyle and he does this stuff all the time. It's a payoff of their earlier conversation, appealing to her adventurous nature, and it does well to set her up as a companion, even if she is doomed to die. Just as a side note, I feel like if you're a new character in a Doctor Who episode and the Doctor offers to take you on board the TARDIS before the day is even saved, you may as well start planning your funeral, because you're already dead. I think that Davies successfully utilises Astrid in this companion role, because she gets split off with the Doctor, having to do her own thing with Slade and Copper, much like how the actual companion usually gets split off from the Doctor and has to take charge for themselves. They run through a couple of rooms and Astrid destroys hosts with an EMP, before she decides that she isn't satisfied with just doing her part and leaving the Doctor to do the rest. Instead, she convinces Frame to let her teleport down to Deck 31 to save the Doctor, like any Doctor Who companion would do. I think it does wonders for legitimising her as a potential companion, since Davies applies these archetypal characteristics to her. He writes her exactly how you would write an actual companion, which means her surprise sacrifice has some emotion to it, even if it is pretty terrible. All throughout the episode there has been an ongoing mystery as to what is happening on Deck 31 of the ship. It's a good mystery for the Doctor to dwell on throughout, and I like how he outsmarts the host to get down to the deck. By using a specific override code, he can demand 3 questions from a host, but here he accidentally wastes 2 of them and will die after using his 3rd. So he has to be smart with how he plays the situation. He's just one man with a saucepan against multiple killer androids, but he manages to squirm his way out by thinking fast and making them realise he's not a passenger or a crew member, so they can't kill him. It's not in their programming. If that's not the Doctor, I don't know what is. It's exactly what the character would do. This loophole especially makes sense when you realise that Max Capricorn is also a stowaway, technically, which is why they can't kill stowaways, instead having to take them to the next highest authority, which is Max. It's a clever way to get the Doctor down to Deck 31, and it also allows him to say the line that everyone always wants to say.
Take me to your leader. I've always wanted to say that.
Once the Doctor gets down to Deck 31, there's a big reveal as we find out the true villain of the story, Max Capricorn, the owner of the cruise company. He's hiding away as a cyborg and engineering the disaster as one giant insurance fraud scheme to get boatloads of money, no pun intended. I think it's a great plan for a Doctor Who villain, feeling a lot like a classic Who era story motivation, with this grand, campy villain hatching a complex scheme to kill an entire planet just to get some money and some revenge on his board for voting him out, although I feel like these pieces fall into place far too late. It's a clever motivation and it makes sense within the story. I just think that the tone and design of Capricorn as a character undercuts this dramatic moment, since David Tennant is playing it straight whilst George Costigan is hamming it up and turning the cheese up to 11. So there's a big disconnect in tone. The resolution of this plot thread is just awful too. Astrid shows up on a forklift to play Robot Wars with Capricorn, but her host cuts the brake line and she goes plummeting off the edge in an overly dramatic moment. It's just too much. Even Rose almost falling into the void in Doomsday didn't look this bad. It all just seems sudden and clunky, awkwardly playing out and trying too hard to be some dramatic and emotional moment. There are then dramatic slow motion shots of our other protagonists as they all seem doomed, and the Doctor walks in slow motion with flames and explosions in the background. It feels too much like a season finale of an American TV show, where a main character makes some grand, overblown sacrifice to save the day. I just think it's unnecessary, especially with the really goofy visual of the host flying the Doctor up to the bridge. Like, how can you take this seriously? The show wants you to. Even though the climax to the Capricorn plot sucks, I like the climactic ending to the episode itself, with the Doctor trying to stop the Titanic from crashing, with exciting music playing, although the visuals once again are a bit comical, as he pulls back on the wheel like someone driving in an old 60s movie. Also, remove the music from this and it's absolutely hilarious. I do like the touch that he notices it will land in London, a little meta reference to the present day episodes always being set in the same places, along with calling back to Wilf's refusal to leave London earlier in the episode. The ship itself looks great, with the CGI clearly having all of the budget allocated there, even though it was initially supposed to destroy Buckingham Palace, but that was deemed too expensive. I think that it's a good dramatic payoff with high stakes, but it also kind of feels shallow to me, and I'm not sure why. It's possibly because it just happens, without much build-up or satisfaction to it. It also doesn't help that they then go completely off the rails with Astrid at the end. Initially, I like what they do here, since the Doctor is so desperate to bring her back and save her. I think it mirrors Foon's refusal to accept Morven's death earlier. He's in denial and bargains, trying to use the teleport system to save Astrid, even though he knows it won't work. I think it's a good way of showing this aspect of the 10th Doctor, infuriated at not being able to save people. He's the incarnation that had to deal with loss and grief the most, always being put in these situations where everyone around him dies, despite him doing his best to try and save them. It's just a shame that it becomes so fairy tale with him kissing her and sending her off to fly amongst the stars as stardust. It feels like the ending to a Moffat episode, which is ironic because something very similar would happen with River Song at the end of The Forest of the Dead, just a few episodes later. I just think it's unnecessary lingering too long in this magical aspect and completely undermining him having to let her go. It would have been a lot more fitting if the projection had just flickered away due to low power, forcing him to watch as her life flickers into nothingness, further pushing that emotional torture and adding to his grief. But maybe that would have been a bit too sad for the kids on Christmas Day.
Oh, that's nice. Crying at Christmas.
I'm not really a fan of Voyage of the Damned. It may be the most viewed Doctor Who episode since 1979, but I absolutely don't think anyone on this planet would say it deserves that distinction in the slightest. It's just such a mediocre and bland episode that simply benefits from the time it came out during, since the show was so absurdly popular that the ratings were through the roof. As a special, it does its job, which is getting the family around the TV after dinner to watch something fun and exciting without thinking too much. But it's all kind of hollow and shallow. It starts off very Christmassy but kind of gives up pretty early on. But I'd still say it's more Christmassy than the other Russell T Davies era Christmas specials. Something minor that annoyed me watching it back is the resolution of the Titanic cliffhanger, since the Doctor just repairs the TARDIS and parks it somewhere else. It basically exposes it as a cheap trick to surprise people at the end of Last of the Time Lords, but that's just a minor grievance. I think that the music of the episode is one of the best things about it, with a great score filled with Christmas classics and new tracks including The Stowaway, which is a genuinely good song on its own. I also can't help but give points to the episode because of the new opening theme arrangement it introduces, which is my favourite of the modern era. It really pumps you up with the boosted, more intense strings. But personally, I would give Voyage of the Damned a C rank on the Series 3 tier list, and a D rank on the Specials tier list. It's far from the worst episode, but it pales in comparison to most of the other specials. It's simply paced awfully, since it feels far too long at its whopping 72-minute runtime. There's too much bloat and filler, along with some pretty mixed acting and writing. Kylie Minogue is not great as Astrid, with some very bad lines and deliveries. But David Tennant is obviously on top form as always, which is a testament to his strong will and commitment to acting, since he had to deal with his mother unfortunately passing away during production of the episode. In terms of the supporting cast, everyone is solid, and Gray O'Brien is especially good as the truly detestable Rixton Slade. I always appreciate when an actor can make you genuinely hate the made up character they're playing. There are some very bad lines floating around, and the Astrid ending feels so tonally wrong for the episode in the era that it just kind of reflects how mediocre the special is as a whole. But then again, it doesn't help that Voyage of the Damned is sandwiched between two of the best series in Doctor Who history. That will always reflect badly on a mediocre special. And I'd like to give a special thank you to my gold level patrons, Steph McNever Miller and Mark Hip Old Guy Taylor. Thank you a lot for your support.